My neighbor intercepted me at the elevator. "Do you know who comes to your son every Tuesday?" I installed a hidden camera in his house and couldn't believe eyes. "I'm glad you're here with me. Please listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled." For 63 years, I'd lived my life believing that family meant safety. My husband Robert and I had built our 3-bedroom colonial in Maple Ridge with our own hands back in 1962, raised our son David here, celebrated every milestone within these walls. When Robert passed 5 years ago, David had held my hand at the funeral and promised I'd never be alone. I should have wondered why he suddenly cared so much. The first crack in my comfortable illusion came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was returning from my morning walk, something I did religiously, rain or shine, because at 78 I refused to let age make me fragile, when Mrs. Chen from 4B intercepted me at the elevator. "Margaret," she said, gripping my arm with unusual urgency. Her English carried that familiar accent, but her eyes held something I'd never seen before: genuine concern mixed with fear. "You seen who comes to your David's house every Tuesday?" My son lived 15 minutes away in the suburbs. I visited occasionally, always by invitation, always announced. "What do you mean?" I asked. Mrs. Chen glanced around the lobby as if the potted ferns might be listening. "Same man. Every Tuesday, 3 o'clock. Fancy suit. Carries briefcase. Stays 1 hour, maybe little more. I see him because I take granddaughter to music lesson, same time every week. Probably a colleague," I said, but something cold had settled in my stomach. "David works in sales." "Margaret," Mrs. Chen's voice dropped. "This man? He not sales. He have look of lawyer. My son is lawyer. I know the type." I thanked her and rode the elevator alone, my mind spinning. Why would David need a lawyer? His business was successful. He'd told me so himself, showed me the quarterly reports I didn't really understand, but admired anyway because he was my son, my only child, and I believed in him. That evening, David called. He always called on Tuesday evenings now that I thought about it. "Just checking in, Mom. How are you feeling?" "I'm perfectly fine," I said. "David, is everything okay? With work? With Carol?" Carol was his wife of 20 years, a woman who smiled with her mouth but never quite with her eyes. "Everything's great, Mom. Actually, Carol and I were thinking, maybe we should talk about your living situation. This apartment, all those stairs, your health." "I take the elevator," I said, "and my health is excellent. Dr. Morrison said so last month." There was a pause. Then, "Well, we just worry. You're not getting any younger. Have you thought about, a community where there's staff, activities, people your own age?" "A nursing home." He meant a nursing home. "I'm 78, not 98. I'm not ready for a community." "Just think about it," he said, his tone carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "Carol and I only want what's best for you." After we hung up, I sat in Robert's old armchair. I'd never been able to throw it out, and stared at the photograph on the mantel. David at his college graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning. When had that young man, full of promise and genuine affection, turned into this stranger who spoke to me like I was a problem to be solved? The following Tuesday, I did something I'd never done before. I lied to my book club, saying I had a doctor's appointment, and instead, I drove to David's neighborhood. I parked 3 houses down at 2:45 p.m., feeling ridiculous and ashamed but unable to stop myself. At exactly 3 p.m., a silver Mercedes pulled into David's driveway. A man in his 50s emerged carrying a leather briefcase, His suit probably cost more than my monthly pension. He walked to the door with the confidence of someone who'd been there before, and David answered before he could knock. They shook hands. David glanced up and down the street. I slumped in my seat, heart hammering, and then they went inside. Mrs. Chen was right. That was no sales colleague. I waited. 45 minutes later, the man left. Through David's front window, I could see him and Carol standing close together, their postures rigid with tension. Carol was gesturing emphatically. David nodded. They were planning something. As I drove home, my hands shaking on the wheel, I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. But I couldn't shake Mrs. Chen's words or the memory of David's voice on the phone. Just think about it. Think about what, exactly? Giving up my independence? My home? My life? That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that lawyer walking into my son's house, and I heard David's new voice, the one that belonged to a stranger wearing my son's face. Something was terribly wrong, and I needed to find out what it was before it was too late. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and pen, trying to think clearly despite the exhaustion and dread weighing on my chest. Robert used to say I had a practical mind. You see problems, Maggie, and you solve them. But how do you solve the problem of your own son plotting against you? Because that's what this was. I knew it in my bones. I made a list of facts, the way Robert would have done. David suddenly concerned about my living situation lawyer visiting his house every Tuesday. Carol's involvement. Her emphatic gestures suggested she was driving their urgency. Something was happening soon. I'd worked as a legal secretary for 32 years before retiring. I knew what lawyers were for: contracts, estates, trusts, and conservatorships. The word hit me like ice water. Conservatorship. Adult guardianship. The legal process where someone is declared incapable of managing their own affairs. I'd typed dozens of those petitions in my career, watched families strip elderly parents of their autonomy, sell their homes, control their money, all for their own good. David wanted to declare me incompetent. My hands trembled as I wrote it down. Once I saw the words on paper, everything clicked into place. The nursing home hints, the concern about my health when I was perfectly fine. He needed to establish a pattern of worry, of documented concern to present to a judge. But why? I had money, not a fortune, but Robert's life insurance, my pension, and the apartment I owned outright. Worth perhaps $850,000 total if you included my savings. Enough to make someone greedy. Enough to kill for, in some families. Though I couldn't imagine David actually. No, I couldn't let my mind go there. I needed evidence. Real evidence. Not just suspicions and a neighbor's observations. For 2 days, I moved through my routine like a ghost, smiling at the mailman, nodding at the doorman. But my mind was constantly working. I needed to know what David and that lawyer were planning. I needed to protect myself. On Thursday, I made a decision that terrified and empowered me in equal measure. I called a locksmith and had my locks changed. When David had given me his emergency key 3 years ago, I'd thought it was sweet. Now I realized it was access. Access to plant evidence of my confusion, my inability to manage, perhaps even medication that would make me appear demented. Was I being paranoid? Maybe. But paranoia keeps you alive when someone wants to put you away. The locksmith, a kind man named Tony, noticed my shaking hands. "You okay, ma'am?" "Just taking precautions," I said, forcing a smile. After he left, I stood in my apartment and felt marginally safer. But changing locks wasn't enough. I needed to document everything. to create my own paper trail that proved my competence. That afternoon, I went to my bank. "I'd like to review my accounts," I told the manager, a woman named Patricia, whom I'd known for 15 years. All of them. And I'd like printed statements for the last year. Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Is something wrong, Margaret?" I hesitated. How much should I say? "I just want to make sure everything's in order. It's been a while since I've done a full review." She printed everything. As I suspected, my accounts were all solely in my name. Robert had insisted on that, having seen too many widows lose control after their husbands died. But I also discovered something interesting. David was listed as my beneficiary on my IRA, worth about $180,000, not as primary owner, not as joint holder, just as the beneficiary when I died. That money was untouchable to him while I lived, unless he had power of attorney, unless he was my conservator. "Patricia," I said slowly, "if someone wanted to access my accounts without my permission, how would they do it?" Her expression shifted from pleasant to concerned. "They couldn't. Not without a court order or documented power of attorney. Margaret, has someone—" "No," I said quickly. "I'm just planning ahead, making sure I understand my own finances." I left the bank with my statements and a new resolve. That evening, I did something else that would have shocked my former trusting self. I went to Best Buy and purchased a small hidden camera. The young clerk showed me how to set it up, how it connected to my phone, how it recorded everything on a cloud server. "My daughter's baby," I lied smoothly. "I want to make sure the nanny's doing right by him." "Good idea," the clerk said. "You can never be too careful." No, you really couldn't. That night, I installed 2 cameras in my apartment, one in the living room, positioned to capture the front door and most of the main space, and one in my bedroom. If David somehow got in, if he'd made a copy of the old key before I changed the locks, I'd have evidence of whatever he planned to do. Then I did something that felt both absurd and necessary. I made an appointment with Dr. Morrison for a complete physical and cognitive evaluation. If David was going to claim I was losing my faculties, I needed medical documentation proving otherwise. As I lay in bed that night, I realized I'd crossed a threshold. I was no longer the trusting mother who believed in her son's goodness. I was a woman at war, fighting for her freedom, her home, her very identity. The fear was still there, cold and persistent. But beneath it, something harder was forming: determination. David had taught me one valuable lesson in all of this. Family loyalty had limits, and mine had just been reached. Dr. Morrison's office smelled like antiseptic and old magazines. I'd been coming here for 12 years, long enough that the receptionist greeted me by name, long enough that the doctor remembered Robert's last days without me having to explain. "Margaret," Dr. Morrison said, settling into his chair across from me. He was younger than me by 15 years, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Stella said you wanted a comprehensive evaluation. Is everything all right?" I'd prepared for this question. "I want documentation of my cognitive state, full neurological exam, memory tests, everything, and I need it in writing." His expression shifted to concern. "Has something happened? Are you experiencing confusion, memory loss?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm experiencing family concern that isn't warranted. I need proof that I'm perfectly competent." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He'd been a doctor long enough to have seen this story before. "I see. Let's do this thoroughly then." 2 hours later, I left his office with a complete bill of health. Blood pressure normal for my age, no signs of dementia or cognitive decline, memory testing in the 90th percentile for my age group. Dr. Morrison had typed it all up, signed it, and sealed it in an envelope. "Keep this somewhere safe," he'd said. "And Margaret, if you need an expert witness, you call me." The fact that he'd offered told me everything about how common this situation really was. That night, David called. "Mom, I stopped by your apartment today. Your key doesn't work." My heart hammered, but I kept my voice steady. "I had the locks changed. The building manager recommended it. There were some break-ins on the 3rd floor." "You didn't mention it." "Why would I? It's my apartment." A pause. Then, "Mom, this kind of confusion, forgetting to tell family about important things, it's exactly what Carol and I have been worried about." Confusion. I hadn't forgotten anything. He was twisting it, already building his narrative. "I'm not confused, David. I chose not to mention routine maintenance. There's a difference." "If you say so." His tone had gone cold. "We'd like to come visit this weekend, Sunday afternoon. We need to talk." "About what?" "Your future, our concerns." "This can't continue, Mom." After we hung up, I sat in the darkening living room, my hands clenched. He was accelerating his timeline. My changing the locks had spooked him, made him realize I was catching on. Sunday was 3 days away. I needed more evidence before then. On Friday morning, I called an old friend from my legal secretary days. Linda Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen from my building, had moved up from secretary to paralegal to office manager at Miller and Associates, one of the largest elder law firms in the city. "Margaret Watson," Linda said warmly when she picked up. "It's been years. How are you?" "I need a favor," I said, "and I need you to not ask too many questions." Linda's warmth turned to alertness. She'd always been sharp. "What kind of favor?" "There's a lawyer who's been visiting my son's house every Tuesday. Drives a silver Mercedes. 50-something expensive suit. I need to know who he is and what kind of law he practices." "That's not much to go on." "Can you do it?" There was a long pause. Then, "Give me until this afternoon." Linda called me back at 3. "Richard Thornton, elder law specialist. His firm handles conservatorships, power of attorney, estate litigation. Margaret, are you in trouble?" Elder law. Conservatorships. My worst fear confirmed. "Not if I can help it," I said. "Linda, if I needed a lawyer, a good one, someone who could fight this, who would you recommend?" "Sarah Brennan at Hutchins and Wade. She's a shark. Specializes in defending against contested conservatorships. Want me to call her for you?" "Please." By Friday evening, I had an appointment with Sarah Brennan for Monday morning. It would cost me $500 just for the consultation, but I had to know my legal options before David and Carol arrived on Sunday. Saturday, I spent the day organizing every document I had. Bank statements, medical records, bills I'd paid on time, my checkbook register showing months of careful accounting. I created a timeline of David's recent behavior, the phone calls, the sudden concern, the Tuesday meetings with Richard Thornton. I also reviewed my hidden camera footage. Nothing alarming, just me going about my daily life, making breakfast, reading the newspaper, watering my plants. But it was proof that I lived independently, managed my household, functioned perfectly well. That night, I couldn't sleep. Tomorrow, David and Carol would come here with their fake concern and their real agenda. They would try to convince me to sign something. Power of attorney, maybe, or voluntary admission to a nice facility. They would use words like safety and quality of life, while really meaning convenient and profitable. But I had one advantage they didn't know about. I knew what they were planning, and I was ready to fight. Sunday arrived with unseasonably cold rain. I'd been awake since 5, dressed in my best slacks and sweater, armor of competence. The hidden cameras were running. My documents were organized in a folder on the coffee table. I'd even made coffee and set out cookies, though the domesticity of it felt grotesque given what was coming. David and Carol arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. My son looked tired, older than his 47 years. Carol wore designer jeans and a sympathetic expression that made my skin crawl. "Mom," David said, kissing my cheek. The gesture felt rehearsed. "How are you feeling?" "Perfectly well," I said. "Come in. I made coffee." We sat in my living room, the same room where David had played with his toy trucks as a child, where Robert and I had celebrated our 40th anniversary, where my entire life lived in the furniture and photographs. Carol's eyes swept the space with an appraising look that made my stomach turn. "Margaret," Carol said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "David and I have been talking. We're worried about you here all alone." "I've been alone for 5 years," I said. "Since Robert died, it hasn't been a problem." David leaned forward. "Mom, we think it's time to consider other options. We've researched some excellent facilities. I'm not going to a nursing home." "Not a nursing home," Carol said quickly. "An active adult community, independent living with support services. We've found a wonderful place called Golden Meadows." "No." The word hung in the air. David's expression hardened. "Mom, you're not thinking clearly. You changed your locks without telling us. You can't keep living like this." "I changed my locks because it's my home and my decision. I'm 78, not senile." "That's exactly what concerns us," Carol said, her voice taking on an edge. "You don't see that you need help. That's a sign of declining judgment." I'd had enough. I opened the folder on my coffee table and pulled out Dr. Morrison's evaluation. "Here, complete physical and cognitive assessment, done 2 days ago. Perfect bill of health. No signs of dementia, confusion, or declining judgment. Would you like to read it?" David's face went pale. Carol's mouth tightened. They hadn't expected this. "Since when do you go to the doctor without telling us?" David said. "Since I'm an adult who doesn't need permission. And speaking of permission, I know about Richard Thornton." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. David and Carol exchanged a look that confirmed everything. "I don't know what you're talking about," David said, but his voice wavered. "The lawyer who visits your house every Tuesday at 3. Elder law specialist. Conservatorships." I pulled out another document, the research Linda had helped me compile. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Carol stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. We're trying to help you, and you're acting paranoid." "Am I? Then why don't you tell me exactly what you've been discussing with Mr. Thornton? What papers have you been drawing up? What petitions have you been preparing to file?" David stood too, his face flushed with anger. "You have no idea what you're talking about. We've been consulting about estate planning, about making sure you're protected. By taking away my rights? By having me declared incompetent? By putting me in a home and taking control of my finances? Your finances?" Carol's laugh was bitter and ugly. "Margaret, you're sitting on almost $1 million between this apartment and your savings. You're 78 years old. Who exactly are you planning to spend it on?" There it was, the truth, naked and vicious. "Not you," I said quietly. "That's for certain." David's hand shot out and gripped my arm hard enough to hurt. "Listen to me, Mom. We're your family. We're trying to do what's best for you. If you fight us on this, it'll just be harder." Judges look at family conflict as evidence of the patient's declining mental state. "You're making this worse for yourself. Take your hand off me." His grip tightened. "Sign the power of attorney, voluntarily. We can make this easy, or we can make it very, very difficult. Your choice." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, fed, loved, sacrificed for, and saw a stranger. Worse than a stranger, an enemy. Get out of my home. We're not leaving until, get out, or I'm calling the police. Carol laughed. And tell them what? That your concerned son is trying to help you? That'll look great when we file the conservatorship petition. But David had seen something in my face that made him pull Carol toward the door. We're going. But Mom, this isn't over. We'll be back. And next time, it won't be a request. The door slammed behind them. I stood there, shaking, my arm throbbing where David had grabbed me, and pulled up the camera footage on my phone. Everything was there. Their threats, Carol's admission about my money, David physically restraining me. Evidence. I forwarded the video to my own email, then to a separate cloud storage account I'd created. Then I sat down in Robert's chair and allowed myself 10 minutes to cry. For the son I'd lost, for the illusions I'd cherished, for the family that had never really existed. Then I dried my eyes, made a cup of tea, and started planning my next move. I had an appointment with Sarah Brennan tomorrow morning, and I had evidence that would make her job much easier. For 3 days after that confrontation, I barely left my apartment. I felt hollowed out, exhausted by adrenaline crash and grief. But I also felt clearer than I had in years. The worst had happened. I'd seen my son's true face, and I'd survived it. Now I just had to make sure I won. Monday morning, I took a cab to the offices of Hutchins and Wade. The building was downtown, all glass and steel, the kind of place that radiated competence and cost. Sarah Brennan's office was on the 14th floor with a view of the city I'd lived in my entire life. She was younger than I expected, maybe 50, with gray streaked dark hair pulled into a bun and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Watson," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "Linda Chen spoke highly of you. Tell me what's happening." I told her everything. The Tuesday meetings with Richard Thornton, David's sudden concern about my living situation, the confrontation Sunday. I showed her Dr. Morrison's evaluation, my financial records, and finally, the video footage. Sarah's expression darkened as she watched David grab my arm, heard Carol's venomous words about my money. "This is assault," she said flatly. "You could press charges. Would that help my case?" She considered. "It would complicate theirs. But conservatorship proceedings aren't criminal court. We need to show that you're competent, independent, and capable of making your own decisions. We also need to show that their petition, when they file it, is motivated by greed, not concern. When they file it, I repeated, not if. After this confrontation, they'll file within 2 weeks. They have to move fast now before you secure more evidence of competence. The longer you remain demonstrably independent, the harder their case becomes. My stomach churned, but Sarah's certainty was oddly steadying. What do I need to do? Everything you're already doing. Document your daily life. Keep your medical appointments. Pay your bills on time. Stay socially active. We need witnesses who'll testify that you're sharp, capable, and living independently. Do you have friends? Community connections? I thought about it. My book club met weekly. I volunteered at the library on Thursdays. I had neighbors like Mrs. Chen who'd already tried to warn me. "Yes," I said. "I have people." "Good. Use them." "And Margaret?" Sarah's expression softened slightly. "I know this is hard. It's your son. But you need to understand. This is war. They're going to say terrible things about you in court. They're going to paint you as confused, declining, a danger to yourself. You need to be ready for that." I met her eyes. "I'm ready." That afternoon, David called. I let it go to voicemail. His voice, when I listened later, was different from Sunday's aggression. Softer, pleading. Mom, I'm sorry about yesterday. Carol and we let our emotions get the better of us. We're just so worried about you. Can we talk? Really talk? Maybe we can find a solution that works for everyone. The manipulation was obvious now that I knew to look for it. The classic abuser's cycle. Violence, then apology, then the promise of change. But I wasn't falling for it. I didn't call him back. Wednesday, Carol tried. She showed up at my building, but the doorman, bless him, called up first. Mrs. Watson, your daughter-in-law is here. Should I send her up? No, I said. Tell her I'm not receiving visitors. She says it's important. Tell her to communicate through my attorney. I gave him Sarah Brennan's card that I'd brought down earlier, anticipating this exact scenario. Thursday at the library, Mrs. Patterson, the head librarian who'd known me for 15 years, pulled me aside during my volunteer shift. Margaret, is everything all right? You seem distracted. I hesitated. Sarah had said to build my support network, to have witnesses to my competence. Mrs. Patterson was exactly that, a respected professional who saw me function normally every week. Can we talk privately? In her office, I told her an abbreviated version. My son wanted to put me in a nursing home against my will, was consulting lawyers, had physically grabbed me during an argument. I showed her the medical evaluation proving my competence. Mrs. Patterson's face went through several emotions: shock, anger, determination. What can I do? If you're ever asked, in court or otherwise, I need you to tell the truth about what you've observed, that I'm reliable, punctual, that my mind is sharp. She gripped my hand. Margaret, you're one of the most capable volunteers we have. You reorganized our entire children's section last year. If anyone tries to say you're incompetent, they'll have to go through me first. I felt tears prick my eyes. Thank you. That evening, my book club met at Nancy's house. 6 women, all around my age, whom I'd known for decades. We'd read together, laughed together, supported each other through deaths and divorces and diagnoses. After we discussed the book, something about post-war Vienna that I barely remembered, I cleared my throat. I need to tell you all something. They listened, their expressions shifting from disbelief to outrage as I explained what David was trying to do. When I finished, there was a moment of heavy silence. Then Gloria spoke up. She was 82, sharp as a tack, with 4 children who adored her. My daughter's a social worker. She specializes in elder abuse. That's what this is, Margaret. Financial abuse and coercion. I'll have her call you. I'll testify, Nancy said immediately. We all will. We see you every week. You're fine. Better than fine, Patricia added. You read more books than any of us and actually remember the plots. For the first time since Mrs. Chen had stopped me at the elevator, I felt something other than fear and anger. I felt supported, protected, believed. Thank you, I whispered. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. David and Carol were circling, watching, waiting for me to slip up or give in. But I wasn't alone, and I wasn't giving up my life without a fight. Saturday morning, 10 days after our confrontation, the doorman called up again. Mrs. Watson, your son is here with his wife and another gentleman. They say it's urgent family business. My pulse jumped. Another gentleman, probably Richard Thornton. They were bringing the lawyer to my home, likely with papers to sign. Tell them I'll be down in 5 minutes. I deliberately made them wait in the lobby rather than allowing them into my apartment. Let them stand there under the doorman's watchful eye, under the building's security cameras. I dressed carefully, a cardigan Robert had given me, good slacks, pearl earrings, and checked my phone to ensure my own hidden camera system was recording everything. Then I went downstairs. David, Carol and a well-dressed man in his 50s stood near the mailboxes. The lawyer, it had to be Thornton, carried a leather folder. All three wore expressions of careful neutrality, the kind you practice in a mirror before difficult conversations. "Mom," David said, stepping forward. "Thank you for coming down. We need to talk." "We can talk here," I said evenly. The doorman, Miguel, was at his desk pretending to sort mail, but clearly listening. "Good." "It's private family business," Carol said, her voice strained with false patience. "Then perhaps you should have called first. Who's your friend?" The lawyer extended his hand. "Richard Thornton, Mrs. Watson. I'm your son's attorney. I've been advising them on some family matters." I didn't shake his hand. "I know who you are. You specialize in conservatorships." His smile didn't falter. "I specialize in protecting families and ensuring elderly parents receive appropriate care. I don't need care. I need my son to respect my autonomy." David's expression cracked slightly, frustration bleeding through. "Mom, please, we're not here to fight. We want to find a solution. We've been talking to a mediator." "You mean you've been planning your petition and realized I won't go quietly?" Carol's face flushed. "You're being incredibly stubborn about this. We've found you a beautiful place at Golden Meadows. Private room, activities, around-the-clock care. I don't need around-the-clock care." "You will," Thornton said smoothly. "Mrs. Watson, I've reviewed your medical history. At your age, decline can happen rapidly. Your son and daughter-in-law are simply trying to plan ahead to ensure you have options when, not if, you need more support. My medical history is confidential. How exactly did you review it?" A pause. Thornton glanced at David. "Your son provided information as your concerned next of kin. Without my permission, that's a HIPAA violation." Thornton's smile thinned. "Let's not get bogged down in technicalities. Mrs. Watson, David tells me you've hired an attorney. That's unnecessary and expensive. This can be settled amicably within the family. We've prepared some documents, a power of attorney, a healthcare directive, that would give David the ability to help you make important decisions. It's not a conservatorship, just protection." He opened the folder, pulled out a sheaf of papers. "If you'd just look these over." "No, Mom, please," David said, and his voice had taken on that pleading tone from his childhood when he wanted something badly. "We're trying to help you. Why are you making this so hard? Don't you trust us?" The question hung in the air. I looked at my son, my only child, the baby I'd nursed and raised and loved beyond measure, and felt nothing but cold clarity. "No," I said, "I don't trust you, not anymore." Carol's mask slipped entirely. "You ungrateful. We've spent hours on this. Hours of our time, money on lawyers, researching facilities, trying to plan for your future. And you're throwing it back in our faces because you're too proud to admit you need help." "I don't need help. I need you to leave me alone." "This isn't over," David said, his voice hardening. "We're filing the petition, Mom. We have evidence of your declining judgment. Changing locks without reason, paranoid accusations, refusing reasonable family assistance. And when we get before a judge, all your stubbornness is going to work against you." "File your petition," I said quietly. "I'll see you in court." Thornton closed the folder with a snap. "Mrs. Watson, you're making a serious mistake. Fighting your family in court is expensive, stressful, and ultimately futile. The courts side with concerned relatives 9 times out of 10. Then I'll be the 10th. Carol grabbed David's arm. "Come on, this is pointless. She's clearly beyond reasoning with." As they turned to leave, David looked back at me. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or the ghost of the boy who'd once loved me. But then Carol whispered something, and his expression hardened again. "You'll regret this," he said. The door closed behind them. Miguel looked up from his desk. You okay, Mrs. Watson? I'm fine, Miguel, thank you. But as I rode the elevator back up to my apartment, my hands were shaking. This was real. They were really going to file a conservatorship petition. They were really going to try to take everything from me. I made it inside my apartment before my knees gave out. I sat on the floor in my entryway, my back against the door, and for several minutes I just breathed. Fear coursed through me, cold, primal fear of losing my home, my independence, my very self. But underneath the fear, something else was growing. A fierce, burning determination. They thought I'd fold. They thought I was too old, too scared, too weak to fight back. They were wrong. I pulled out my phone and called Sarah Brennan. They're filing the petition. Probably this week. Good, she said. Let them. We're ready. The petition arrived by courier on Thursday, in the matter of the conservatorship of Margaret Helen Watson. I read it sitting at my kitchen table, Sarah Brennan on speakerphone, and felt a strange detachment as I absorbed the lies printed on official legal paper. Exhibits signs of declining cognitive function and poor judgment. Refuses appropriate medical care. Displays paranoid thinking and hostility toward family. Unable to manage financial affairs. Requires immediate intervention for her own safety and welfare. They'd included an affidavit from David detailing my concerning behaviors. Changing locks without telling them, making accusations about lawyers, refusing to consider assisted living, isolating myself from family. Each lie was wrapped in just enough truth to sound plausible. This is actually good for us, Sarah said. They've overplayed their hand. Every claim they've made we can disprove with documentation. Your medical evaluation, your financial records, the video of their threats. Margaret, they've walked right into our trap. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Expedited because David had claimed I was in immediate danger of self-harm through neglect. Judge Patricia Hendricks presiding. I know Hendricks, Sarah said. She's smart, fair, and doesn't like families who waste the court's time with frivolous petitions. If we present our case well, this could be over in one hearing. Those 3 weeks felt like 3 years. I documented everything obsessively. Every meal I cooked, every bill I paid, every book I read, every conversation I had. My book club friends rallied around me. Gloria's daughter, the social worker, visited and wrote a statement. Mrs. Patterson from the library did the same. Dr. Morrison prepared to testify. David and Carol didn't contact me directly, but I felt them watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I didn't. The hearing date arrived on a cold Tuesday in May. I wore a navy suit that I'd owned since Robert's funeral, pearls, sensible shoes. Sarah met me at the courthouse looking sharp in gray and carrying 3 accordion folders of evidence. Remember, she said, answer questions directly and briefly. Don't get emotional. Show the judge exactly what you are, competent, clear-minded, and in control. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Judge Hendricks was a black woman in her 60s, with reading glasses on a chain and an expression that suggested she'd heard every possible lie in her decades on the bench. David and Carol sat with Richard Thornton at the petitioner's table. Carol wore a somber dress and a concerned expression. David looked tired and nervous. Good. Let's proceed, Judge Hendricks said. Mr. Thornton, present your case. Thornton stood and delivered a polished speech about a loving son worried about his aging mother. He presented their evidence. David's affidavit about my concerning behaviors, a statement from Carol about my increasing hostility and paranoia, even a letter from a neighbor I barely knew claiming I'd seemed confused in the lobby. Your Honor, Mrs. Watson is 78 years old and living alone. She's begun displaying textbook signs of declining capacity, paranoid thinking, poor judgment, refusal of help. Her family simply wants to ensure she receives appropriate care before a crisis occurs. Judge Hendricks looked at me. Mrs. Watson, you're represented by counsel. Does your attorney wish to respond? Sarah stood. Yes, Your Honor. And I'll be brief because this petition is frivolous and motivated not by concern, but by greed. Thornton shot to his feet. Objection! That's inflammatory! Overruled, Judge Hendricks said. I'll determine what's inflammatory. Continue, Ms. Brennan. Sarah presented our evidence methodically. Dr. Morrison's evaluation, my financial records showing careful management, statements from friends and community members, my volunteer work, my book club participation. Each piece of paper was a brick in the wall of my competence. Then she played the video from the confrontation. The courtroom went silent as David's voice filled the space. Sign the power of attorney. We can make this easy, or we can make it very, very difficult. Carol's vicious comment about my money. David's hand gripping my arm. When it ended, Judge Hendricks removed her glasses and fixed David with a stare that could have frozen water. Mr. Watson, did you physically restrain your mother during this conversation? David's face had gone pale. I was just trying to make her listen. That's assault. Did you and your wife threaten her with a difficult legal process if she didn't comply with your demands? We were trying to help. It sounds like coercion to me. Ms. Brennan, does your client wish to press charges? Sarah glanced at me. I shook my head slightly. Not yet. Not at this time, Your Honor. We simply want this petition dismissed. Judge Hendricks turned her attention to Thornton. Mr. Thornton, you've presented a conservatorship petition for a woman who has a clean bill of health from her physician, manages her finances competently, maintains an active social life, and volunteers regularly in her community. The only evidence of declining capacity comes from family members who, according to this video, have clear financial motivations and have engaged in threatening behavior. Do you have anything else to add? Thornton shuffled papers, his composure cracking. Your Honor, the video lacks context. The context seems quite clear. Mrs. Watson, would you please stand? I stood, my heart pounding. Mrs. Watson, do you wish to remain in your own home and maintain control of your own affairs? Yes, Your Honor. Do you have concerns about your son having any access to your finances or healthcare decisions? Significant concerns, Your Honor. I see no reason why you shouldn't maintain your independence. Judge Hendricks looked at Thornton and David with undisguised contempt. Petition denied. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order preventing Mr. David Watson and Mrs. Carol Watson from contacting Mrs. Margaret Watson directly or indirectly for a period of 1 year. Any violation will result in contempt charges. She banged her gavel. We're adjourned. The weeks following the hearing brought a cascade of consequences for David and Carol that I watched with cold satisfaction. First came the professional fallout. Sarah Brennan filed a formal complaint with the state bar against Richard Thornton for pursuing a frivolous conservatorship petition and for accessing my medical records without proper authorization. The Bar Association launched an investigation. Within a month, news reached me through Linda Chen that Thornton's firm had quietly asked him to resign. His specialty in elder law, his entire career, had been built on reputation, and now that reputation was destroyed. No family would hire a lawyer who'd been publicly rebuked for exploitation. But that was just the beginning. I'd spent the days after the hearing consulting with Sarah about my options. She'd laid them out clearly. I could let this end with the restraining order, or I could pursue consequences that would ensure David and Carol never tried this again. They assaulted you, Sarah said. They attempted to defraud you through legal coercion. They violated your medical privacy. You have grounds for civil and criminal charges. I thought about Robert. What would he have wanted? He'd always been a gentleman, forgiving, slow to anger. But he'd also been fiercely protective. And he would have said that mercy should be reserved for those who show remorse. David and Carol had shown none. File everything, I told Sarah. The criminal complaint for assault went through the district attorney's office. David was arrested at his workplace. A small mercy, I suppose, that it wasn't at home in front of his neighbors. But I wasn't feeling particularly merciful. He spent 4 hours in processing before Carol bailed him out. The charges were misdemeanor assault and coercive control of an elderly person, enhanced because of our familial relationship. He pled no contest to avoid trial. The judge sentenced him to 1 year of probation, mandatory anger management classes, and a $5,000 fine. But the criminal case was almost gentle compared to the civil lawsuit. Sarah filed suit for attempted financial exploitation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and invasion of privacy. We sought damages of $500,000, a calculated number representing the value they'd tried to steal through conservatorship. Discovery was brutal for them. We subpoenaed every communication between David and Thornton, every email between David and Carol about me, every document Thornton had prepared. The paper trail revealed everything: their calculations of my net worth, their timeline for transitioning me to Golden Meadows, even their plans for how to divide my assets once they had control. Carol had wanted to sell my apartment immediately and split the proceeds. David had wanted to keep it as a rental property. They'd been arguing about my money before they'd even taken it. The case never went to trial. 2 weeks before the court date, their lawyer, not Thornton, who was dealing with his own investigation, approached Sarah with a settlement offer. "They'll pay $450,000, Sarah told me over the phone. "It's a good offer, Margaret. It acknowledges wrongdoing without the stress of trial." "Do they admit guilt?" "The settlement includes a signed statement acknowledging their actions caused you harm and were motivated by financial gain rather than genuine concern." "I'll take it." The check arrived 6 weeks later, $450,000, and with it, a 2-page statement signed by both David and Carol, admitting to everything. Sarah had insisted on the admission. It couldn't be sealed or withdrawn, and I could share it with anyone I chose. I had copies made and sent one to every member of David's company leadership team, Carol's book club, their neighbors, and their closest friends. Not out of spite, though I won't pretend spite didn't factor in, but out of a sense of public service. Other elderly parents in their circle should know what these people were capable of. The social consequences were swift and severe. Carol's friends stopped calling. David's colleagues treated him with cold courtesy. Their neighbors crossed the street to avoid them. The shame that they'd hoped to impose on me by declaring me incompetent had boomeranged back on them tenfold. 3 months after the settlement, I heard through Mrs. Chen, who heard from her cousin who lived near David, that they'd put their house on the market. They were leaving town, slinking away to start over somewhere their names weren't synonymous with elder abuse. Good riddance. I used part of the settlement money to establish a legal defense fund at Sarah Brennan's firm, money set aside specifically to help elderly people fight conservatorship abuse. The fund would cover initial consultations and basic legal work for those who couldn't afford it. "The Margaret Watson Defense Fund," Sarah said when we signed the papers. "It's going to help a lot of people." "It already helped one," I said. "But the greatest victory wasn't the money or the consequences or even the public vindication. It was the quiet morning 2 months after the settlement when I woke up in my own bed, in my own home, with no one's permission but my own to live exactly as I chose. I made coffee in my kitchen. I read the newspaper in Robert's old chair. I paid my bills and called my friends and made plans to volunteer at the library. I was 79 years old and I was free. No one would ever take that from me again. The year following my victory transformed from a period of recovery into something I'd never expected at my age: renaissance. I woke each morning without the weight of fear pressing on my chest. The hidden cameras came down. I didn't need them anymore. The locks stayed changed, of course, but now they represented not paranoia, but sensible security. My apartment felt like home again, rather than a fortress. The book club became my anchor. After everything that happened, those women had rallied around me with a fierceness that still made me tear up when I thought about it. We expanded our meetings from bi-weekly to weekly, and I found myself laughing more than I had in years. Gloria, Nancy, Patricia, they weren't just friends anymore. They were my chosen family, the sisters I'd never had. "You should write about this," Nancy said one evening after we'd finished discussing our latest novel. "What you went through. Other people need to know they can fight back." I hadn't considered it, but the idea took root. I started writing in the mornings, just an hour or two, documenting everything. Not for publication, I wasn't sure I wanted that level of exposure, but for myself, and maybe for other elderly parents who found themselves under siege from their own children. Sarah Brennan invited me to speak at an elder law conference. The Margaret Watson Defense Fund had helped 17 people in its first year, and she wanted me to address the attorneys and social workers about my experience. I was terrified, but I did it. Standing at that podium, looking out at a room full of professionals who protected people like me, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced since Robert died. The library promoted me from volunteer to part-time paid consultant, helping redesign their outreach programs for senior citizens. Mrs. Patterson said my unique perspective on what older adults needed made me invaluable. The paycheck was small, but the validation was enormous. I even started dating, something I never thought I'd do again after Robert. Harold was a widower from my building, a retired accountant with kind eyes and a dry sense of humor. We went to movies, tried new restaurants, took walks along the river. Nothing serious, just companionship and the pleasant discovery that life still held surprises. "You seem different," Harold said one evening over dinner. "Younger, somehow." "I won a war," I told him. "It ages you, then it makes you young again." Meanwhile, David and Carol's exodus from their old life continued its downward spiral. Through the informal network of neighborhood gossip that still reached me through Mrs. Chen and others, I pieced together their unraveling. They'd moved to Arizona, Phoenix specifically, supposedly for a fresh start. But reputation follows you in the internet age. David's LinkedIn profile told the story. He'd been fired from his sales position 2 months after the settlement. His new job in Phoenix was 3 levels below his previous position, at a fraction of the salary. Carol's situation was worse. She'd tried to maintain her book club connections remotely, but the women had quietly dropped her. Her social media presence, once full of carefully curated photos of her perfect life, had gone silent. She'd deleted Facebook entirely after someone posted a screenshot of the court settlement admission. Their marriage was fracturing. I knew this not from schadenfreude, but from a call I'd received from Carol's sister, whom I'd always liked. "Margaret," Linda had said. Carol's sister shared a name with my legal secretary friend. Small world. "I need to apologize for what my sister did. I had no idea they were planning that. If I'd known—" "You couldn't have stopped them," I'd said, "but thank you." "I want you to know they're falling apart. Carol calls me crying every week. David's drinking. They're in debt from the legal fees and the settlement. Their marriage counselor gave them 6 months tops." I should have felt satisfaction, but mostly I felt sad. Not for them, they'd earned their consequences, but for the waste of it all. If David had just let me live my life, he would have inherited everything eventually anyway. His greed had cost him his career, his reputation, his marriage, and ironically, the very money he'd been trying to steal. The universe has a sense of humor, even if it's cruel. One evening, Harold and I were walking back from dinner when I saw a young woman helping her elderly mother into a car. The mother was frail, clearly unwell, and the daughter was patient and gentle, supporting her carefully. "That's how it should be," I said quietly. Harold squeezed my hand. Most families get it right. You just had the bad luck to get the exception. Maybe. Or maybe I'd had the good luck to be strong enough to fight back. 6 months after the settlement, I received a letter from David. It had been sent to Sarah's office. He didn't have my address anymore due to the restraining order, and Sarah called to ask if I wanted it forwarded. "What does it say?" I asked. "Do you want me to read it?" "Please." Sarah cleared her throat. "Dear Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I realize now that what Carol and I did was wrong. We were stressed about money, and we convinced ourselves we were helping you, but that was a lie. We were helping ourselves. I'm sorry. I know you probably won't forgive me, and I don't expect you to. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. David." I was silent for a long moment. "What do you think?" Sarah finally asked. "I think sorry doesn't give me back the year of fear. Sorry doesn't erase being told I was crazy. Sorry doesn't undo the assault or the invasion of privacy." "So no response?" "No response," I confirmed. "Let him live with it. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes." But I didn't need David's apology to move forward. I was already moving, already building a life richer than anything I'd had before. I had friends, purpose, autonomy, and the fierce pride of someone who'd looked into the darkness and refused to blink. At 79, I was living my best life, and David and Carol were living with their choices. That seemed like justice enough, so that's my story. The year I discovered my son wanted to steal my life, and the year I fought back and won. I tell you this because maybe you're in a similar situation. Maybe you're wondering if you're imagining things, if your family really has your best interests at heart, if you're strong enough to stand up to the people you love. You are. Trust your instincts. Document everything. Find good people, lawyers, doctors, friends, who believe you, and fight. What would you do in my situation? Have you experienced something similar? Leave a comment below. I read them all. If you found this story helpful or compelling, please subscribe to my channel. I share stories like this because elder abuse thrives in silence. The more we talk about it, the more we shine light into those dark corners, the harder it becomes for predators to operate. I have other stories too, tales of resilience, of people who refuse to become victims, of ordinary folks who found extraordinary courage. Check out my channel for more. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing that a 78-year-old woman could fight back against her own family and win. Remember, you're never too old to fight for yourself. You're never too old to demand respect. And you're never, ever too old to start over. Stay strong.